Welcome to the Soul Grit Podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, welcome back to the Soul Grit Podcast. This is Ann, and today is going to be a little bit different format than what we usually do. Typically, I'll have a guest and we'll do an interview, or I might do something to teach you about a certain psychological or counseling concept. But today, I just want to give you some updates about where Soul Grit is going and where we've been, and tell you about some more resources that we have to offer that you might not actually know about. First of all, I'd like to celebrate. I didn't get to mention it last week on the podcast, but last week's episode, Anxiety Tools for Christians with Healy Eichard, was actually the 50th episode. And so that's a really big landmark for me. To be able to put out that much content over the course of about 10 months was quite a feat. And so with that, now in the rear view mirror, I'm looking forward to next month. June 1st is going to be the 1-year anniversary of the Soul Grit podcast. And so I am working towards some really fun things that will be part of that episode to celebrate the anniversary of something that has just been a really challenging and rewarding and fun time for me over the past year. As you probably noticed, there are no ads or any kind of promotions on this podcast. So really, it has just been a labor of love for me to be able to talk to all of these really interesting people. I consider it a ministry to bring you information about counseling, about psychology, and about how that all fits in with our Christian faith. So thank you for being along with me on this ride of figuring out how to run a podcast and bring you some really crucial information in a way that's encouraging and uplifting. So for today, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about another resource that I have offered on my website that you might not know about. And so this is going to apply specifically if you are a therapist or a therapist in training, or if you know someone who is, and you can pass this bit of information along to them. Of course, I always like to speak to you pastors and church leaders as well. And so I just kind of want to get the word out for anybody that might be connected to the therapy world and wants a better way to integrate our Christian faith into the practice of counseling and psychotherapy. So I want to introduce you to the course that I wrote. This was my COVID project, actually. So when COVID hit in March of 2020, that summer, I said, okay, God, so I have this extra time to be at home, of course, seeing clients online and educating kids from home too. That spring in 2020, we didn't actually do very much education. I don't know about you. Some of the private schools were still doing pretty much normal education, but for our kids that go to public school, there wasn't a whole lot going on, and lots of time at home. The world was very, very uncertain. So that summer in 2020, I asked God, would you like me to follow this passion or this passion? And the two ideas that I presented in front of God were to start the podcast or to write an e-course. And I got the word that the e-course was going to be the first thing that I would write. And so it took a whole extra year to get the podcast going. So now you're hearing my voice, but before that was even a possibility, I spent some time over the summer of 2020 writing a course. And the course came out of this desire that I saw, or that I felt, to have other people who are Christians and who are therapists know how to integrate their faith. So if you've been listening to the Soul Grit podcast for any length of time, you've probably heard me talk about Western seminary and how I was trained to integrate Bible and theology along with sound clinical practices for psychotherapy. And yet, as I network with other therapists in my community, I often get met with people who are personally Christians. They have a personal faith in Jesus Christ that they practice in one way or another. And then they're also professionally therapists, but the worlds never meet. And that's not how I practice, as you probably can tell by the way that I talk on the podcast. But it got me wondering why some people would feel like they wanted to keep those two areas compartmentalized when I personally believe that they can be integrated really beautifully. So I started thinking through some of the problems that might cause someone who's a therapist and also a Christian to not want to practice from an integrated perspective. And so I took that and ran with it and started writing my course, which is called Faith Integration for Therapists. And it is specifically designed for therapists who do have a personal Christian faith, but don't know how to bring that into the counseling room in a way that is safe and appropriate and healthy. I'm sure we've all heard horror stories of people who thought they were doing a good job of Christian counseling, but really produced more shame and condemnation in the clients that they were seeing, or they slapped a Christian cliche or Bible verse on what they were doing in the counseling room and called it Christian counseling. And I really wanted to show that that's not good Christian counseling. I wanted to teach people how to do good Christian counseling. So for the rest of our time today, which is not going to be a very long episode, I just wanted to go over what you might find in the course if you were to come alongside with me and learn this from the e-course that I wrote, Faith Integration for Therapists. So you can also find all this information on my website, soulgritresources.com, and click the tab at the top that says courses, and you'll find a little intro video from me where I can talk a little bit more about this whole process. So in the course that I wrote, there are 5 modules, and so it's quite a bit of content. It will take a few weeks for you to get through it if you do it in like a slow, digestible way. But I broke all of the videos down into 5 or 10 minute components. Some might be a little bit longer, like 15 to 20, but most of them are very short. And they all have worksheets that go with them, reflection questions that you'll want to ask yourself, and an opportunity to network with other therapists through a Facebook group, as well as to contact me for private coaching and consulting, and a way to just think through some of the ideas that this course will bring up. Some of the objectives of the course are to build your confidence in doing this, because I recognize that some therapists might not be doing it just because they don't feel confident because they didn't have a training. I did have that advantage of going to a Christian seminary for my preparation, and so I felt really prepared for this. But I recognize that if a lot of therapists are trained through secular universities, they're not getting integration in any way, and they're really left on their own. I did find in a couple of organizations in the United States, there are some classes that you can buy online that would teach you about integration, but nothing offered a complete package of how to run your practice as a Christian, as well as how to do the nitty-gritty of the integration when you're in the room with clients. So one of the things that you will get from this course would be to just really understand what your qualifications are and how to be more confident in them, and as well as your personal experience. And then I'll also be giving you practical guidance on just more of the administrative and businessy parts of running a Christian counseling practice, like marketing. Like, how do you market as a Christian? And do you have to only market to Christians, or can you also include people of other faiths or of no faith when you're operating as a Christian counselor? And then again, also, how do you network with other Christians and with non-Christian therapists to make sure you're getting the right kinds of clients? I spent some time helping you understand how the Bible fits with popular counseling psychology approaches, everything from attachment to cognitive behavior therapy and lots of other theories that you're probably familiar with from your counseling background, and then how to integrate Bible knowledge into that and to use it in an appropriate way with your clients. One of the big objections that I hear is always the legal and ethical considerations. And some therapists think you're not allowed to talk about God in the counseling room. So I actually did a search on some of the major counseling and therapy associations, such as the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, the APA, all of this, and found out that there's really not as much as you might think being said about faith in their ethical documents. And so I'll teach you about those things. And then I'll also help you to develop a strategy when you're working with a wide range of clients. Some of them will be inside the Christian faith and some of them will be outside of them. We're living in really diverse and polarized times. So how do you work with people whose beliefs may fall somewhere else on the spectrum from where yours do, and whose families might have a different makeup than what you're familiar with, or whose cultures might be different? Let me go a little bit more in depth about what you might hear. Module 1 is the integration into provider. We're going to be going over what is integration and who is qualified. What is your calling and how do you know it? We'll have special guest interviews with people that can help you understand that calling in more of a story, a personal story. We'll go over your identity and sanctification, how you become sanctified as the provider. And we'll talk about counseling when it's a ministry opportunity versus a business or a professional service. Module 2 is all about case conceptualization. So I'll teach you to think pastorally and clinically about your cases. I will help you understand how your personal values fit into your counseling practice and how that interacts with your clients' personal values. And I'm going to go through several of the major counseling theories through the lens of Scripture, so you'll know exactly how that fits with what you're reading in your Bible. And again, I'll have a special guest interview. That's this one in Module 2 is actually a friend who's going to talk about attachment from the lens of both clinical and how God sees you and how you attach with God. It's really interesting. Module 3 is practical application. And I think this is what a lot of people are looking for as well. Just tell me what to do and how to do it. So this is going to cover everything from marketing your practice to making the initial contact with new clients, writing your informed consent, doing a spiritual assessment, and including faith questions on your intake paperwork, whether you allow clients to initiate spiritual conversations or you bring them up, and how to use pastoral exhortation in the counseling setting. We'll talk about kind of conversations with fringe believers. So people who maybe have a lifestyle or a practice of Christianity that's a little bit outside of the mainstream evangelical or Catholic or mainline denominations, or who identify as Christians but don't necessarily walk a Christian life, how to do that, as well as how to work with non-believers. A lot of times when we're working with a family or a couple, you're going to be working with one believer and one non-believer, and how to walk that line and meet them both in that place. Another item that we'll talk about in Module 3 is just how to spot those potential obstacles with different kinds of believers and how to handle differences of beliefs when your client may be anticipating that you believe a certain way because you identify as a Christian and that you don't actually believe that way, or vice versa, where you're expecting that they might have a certain belief because they identify as Christian and they don't actually. So let me see. Module 4. This is into the nitty-gritty of those legal and ethical considerations. We'll talk about how you find your state-specific requirements, and I'll show you that with a screen share. We'll talk about participating in different organizations and how that might help you stay within the legal and ethical boundaries of your particular license while practicing as a Christian counselor. And so that's going to include both those Christian counseling organizations as well as the state or national organizations that govern your whole license. So sometimes it's helpful to participate in those just for the protection and the knowledge that you get from them. We'll talk about the different kinds of licenses and certifications that are used in Christian counseling and how you get trained or certified in those things, and also how you advertise and document as a Christian counselor, because some of those considerations might be a little bit different than somebody who practices from a secular lens. I like to talk about the Christian bubble because we are actually part of a subculture, and we can operate kind of almost like a small town, even if you live in a large community. Once you become part of this Christian subculture, you're going to interact with people who are also in that subculture in more of the ways that a small town would, where you run into each other, you know more about each other's business, things like that. And then we'll just talk about protection from litigation, because I know nobody wants to get sued. So those are all the things that we talk about in Module 4. And then Module 5 is just special considerations. So we're talking about cultural differences. You may be a white Christian working with a Black Christian family or a Latin American Christian family. You may need to know a little bit more about the history of your client's family culture within the Christian context. And so we're going to talk through some of those issues. I love to talk about cultural diversity, whether that's race or even denomination or gender identity. There's a lot of different ways that we celebrate diversity within the Christian context. I'll give you some special guidance on how you work with spiritually mismatched couples and families. Like I said, when one is a believer, one is not, and a special little section on what to do when parents come in and they're Christians and they're worried about their kids who are no longer walking with God. I'm sure if you've counseled for any time in the Christian world, you've heard parents that are worried about that. So those are the main things that we go over in the course, and I just wanted to share that with you because I've been podcasting for almost a year, and I know that many of you don't even know that I did this, and this was a large amount of work, but I also think it's going to be really impactful, and I want you to have access to that. So I am going to give you the website. It will be on the show notes for today. And again, that's at soulgritresources.com. And you can go to the tab at the top marked courses, and you'll see a little intro video, and you can find out more about it. And you're probably also wondering about how much does it cost and all of that. You'll see that on the website. But I also want to tell you, if you are somebody who is really interested in this and you want to take a chance on it, just go ahead and email me and I will give you a discount code. I want to get as many people as possible to have access to this material. So go ahead and email me and I'll get you started with this, and can't wait to have that connection with you as a Christian counselor or as a Christian who's a counselor and wanting to know more about integration. This is one of the big passions of my life. So really want to connect with you. I also want to just go over a couple of FAQs about the course. If you're not yet a therapist, or at least in grad school to become a therapist, this isn't a course for you. So there will be other resources for you, more podcasts, more blog posts, and those are the things for people who are outside of the counseling profession, but this course is specifically for people who are in the counseling profession. And want to let you know that it does apply to you. Even if you're not working in a private practice setting like I am, you will still be able to take a lot of these principles into an agency, a group practice, or even a county type mental health job. As I said, there's also a Facebook group that goes along with this course so that you can get support from other Christian therapists who are working in this integration kind of perspective. If this is something new to you, that support is going to be really invaluable. Just also want to highlight that this course is not for people who don't have personal faith in Jesus. So if you are not yet a Christian, I'd also like you to email me and we'll talk about that a little bit. I hope you're finding the Soul Grit podcast really edifying. Wow, that's a really Christian word. Sorry. Outside of the Christian church, we might say encouraging, uplifting. Those are still good words. But I hope you're enjoying the podcast and you're seeing a new perspective on how Christians want to help people through mental health challenges. And this course might not be for you yet, but I think if you're listening and you're interested, it might be for you in the future. So go ahead and send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions about this or about integration in general. As I've said before, sometimes the episodes that you hear are just from listeners, or are sparked from listeners who have a topic that they're interested in. If you email me at info@soulgritresources.com. I'll be happy to take your questions and turn them into episodes in the future. I love having interaction with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you will pass it on to someone who is just ready to serve the kingdom of God with their counseling practice. The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.